Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Charpenel. I'm the Executive Director of El Museo del Barrio. This is a very exciting evening because we will be having a panel discussion around Estamos Bien, la Trienal of El Museo del Barrio. As you all know, we used to have the format of S-File, which was a biennial who focused on the Latinx production in the area of New York. Now, Estamos Bien La Trienal has a national format and is focusing on the national production of Latinx artists. I would like to thank Elena Vidal for organizing this panel and the three curators, Elia Alba, who's the guest curator of La Trienal, and the Museo del Barrio curators, Rodrigo Moura and Susanna Temkin, for conceptualizing and producing this great exhibition. Thank you everyone for attending this discussion y bienvenidos.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rodrigo Moura. I'm the Chief Curator of El Museo del Barrio. It is a big honor to be here tonight with all of you. Thanks everyone for attending. Just before we start with our panel tonight that will be moderated by Rocío Aranda-Alvarado, I would like to make a formal acknowledgement and share our deepest gratitude with everyone who supported the Trienal in our journey so far. Tonight we are releasing the list of participating artists, and our biggest thanks go to each and every one of them, right? So thanks for joining, thanks the artists. We would like to just to have a little fun at this symbolic moment to unveil the list quite formally, and to do so we will read the list another time for the first time publicly, but we've been practicing. So I ask Susanna Temkin and Elia Alba to join me in this exercise. Participating artists: Frances Almendares,
Andrea Alvarez,
Eddie R. Aparicio,
Fontaine Capel,
Carolina Caicedo,
Juan William Chavez,
Yanira Collado,
Collective Magpie,
Lisania Cruz,
Amarilis de Jesus Moleski,
Dominique Duraceau,
Justin Favela,
Luis Flores,
Hector Garcia,
Maria Gaspar,
Victoria Gitman,
Antonio Gomez,
Manuela Gonzalez,
Lucia Hierro,
Ime Izquierdo Ugas,
the Museum of Pocket Art,
Esteban Jefferson,
Roberto Lugo,
Carlos Martiel, oh, I'm sorry,
Carlos Martiel,
Patrick Martinez,
Yvette Mallorca,
Groana Melendez,
Maria Jose,
Michael Menchaca,
Dionis Ortiz,
Concili Creación,
Post Commodity,
Simonette Quimina,
Vic Quesada,
Sandy Rodriguez,
Elaine Rodriguez,
Nugent E. Smith,
Edra Soto,
Ada Trillo,
Joey Terrell,
Torn Apart Separados,
Vincent Valdez,
and Raelis Vasquez. Thank you so much, each and every one of you. Now I will pass on to you, Rocío, and thanks for moderating us tonight.
Such an amazing list. I'm so honored to be here with all of you and to help celebrate the artists who will be included in the Trienal. So I'm joined by Susanna, Rodrigo, and Elia to talk a little bit about the history of the Bienal, which is now the Trienal, originally the S-Files. And at any time, anyone from the audience who has a question, you're encouraged to drop it into the Q&A so that we're really eager to have an informal discussion where you're an equal part of contributing to the discussion and the ideas behind this. So we did a little outline last week to cover several themes, and we have a lot to talk about. So I'm just going to dive right in and start a little bit about the history of La Biennial / Trienal / S-Files, and how this version differs a little bit. I just want to mention that this was an idea birthed by Deborah Cullen and colleagues at El Museo at the time, and started as a move to correct the invisibility of Latinx artists in other periodic shows, like the Whitney Biennial, the New Museum Triennial, the PS1 Greater New York. But I would say even more than that, to provide opportunities to local artists from the New York City region, where the demographics were changing and growing rapidly, many Latinos moving to New York City, many born and raised there. And so it became a way to serve those artists who needed a place to show their work. And from the beginning, Deborah also wanted to invite an outside curator to make the curatorial process more equitable and to incorporate broader perspectives. And one of the things that I've always said publicly is I always think artists are the smartest people in the room. I always pay attention to what artists are saying. And so one of the things I wanted to do while I was at El Museo is invite an artist to be a co-curator. So around 2016, I asked Elia if she would consider being the co-curator for the next version of the biennial. And I'm so happy that she's still part of the team today. We started doing studio visits. We were just reminiscing yesterday, or maybe this morning, about how we went out in the cold and the wet and the snow to visit artists deep in Brooklyn, 5, at a time. We'd stack a whole day with studio visits, and it was just so fulfilling and beautiful. And I know that you all have had the same experience meeting with artists, but in this case, nationally. And I think it's important. This is still an important exhibition because it is an effort towards cultural equity and correcting the invisibility of US Latinx artists in contemporary American art history. And so it'd be great if you talked a little bit about the process of deciding to make this a national show, and talk about how it relates to that history of those exhibitions.
Maybe you should start, Susanna.
Yeah, I mean, I would just love to confess that before I had even moved to New York, before I even went to graduate school, I came to the city to travel, and I visited El Museo. And the first show I saw at El Museo was an S-Files show. So I'm so excited that I can now say that somehow I'm part of this lineage of exhibitions. But when we started looking at the past exhibition history and pouring through old catalogs, we actually did some pretty interesting number crunching to see how the numbers of artists participated, but also how the curators were speaking about the artists at the time. So definitely in the beginning, when Deborah started it, there was the conversation about Latin American and Latino. And then I think as the years went past with different curators, from Yasmin Ramirez to Carmen Ramos, I believe, was an invited curator, how that term started shifting more towards Latino, more towards the concept of Latino artists are American artists. And now I think, the word Latinx, it's very much, I saw Rita Moreno throwing her chancleta the other day to George Lopez on TV, arguing for the use of Latinx on, CBS. So I think Latinx, it's part of the national dialogue. So it only seemed appropriate for us to also, extend the show nationally.
Elia, do you want to say a little bit about your experience as an artist working on this?
It's first of all, Rodrigo and Susanna are incredible, and I'm grateful for that. I could have gone into a situation that it wasn't so great because I knew you, and so it was, and I accepted it because I knew you. And then Patrick approached me before I think Susanna and Rodrigo came in and said, do you still want to do this? Because I would like for you to continue. And so I said, yes. And we started talking about making it a national show at that moment too, like because of the way things are, you know, back in like 2017 or 18, like to have a conversation about Latino art just couldn't remain in New York. It was, I mean, it was like way bigger than that. I mean, we all kind of knew that. So it was very appropriate for a museo, being a museum of Latinx and Puerto Rican art, to expand and to be at the forefront of doing a survey of this nature.
Yes, I think I would like to share a little bit on this first point. And I mean, I wanna add to what you guys said about the exhibition as a platform, right? I think that's one point that, I mean, I come from a culture of a lot of Biennial fatigue. No, I mean, a lot of critique to the format of Biennales. You know, I remember growing up and reading a lot about this notion of the proliferation of the Biennales, right? But then I think to work on a museum, it's completely different. To work, to curate a Trienal in a museum context is very different. And when you have a mandate that is ethnocentric or is cultural specific to a degree, and of course we will talk about this more during this talk. I think it's really, this was really something that was there was an opportunity to come forward with this idea, right? So I remember the early conversations I had with Elia and with Susanna. I think you had just left, Rocío, and Susanna had joined, and as Elia, just, you know, anecdotally, Patrick reached out to Elia to bring the team together with our participation. And there was one thing that was interesting to me. The first one is probably to make things a little bit more, to breathe more. So not every 2 years, not every year, because I think it's beautiful when you go over the catalogs, you see the evolution of the show, how it really expanded and how it narrowed in different moments, and how some curators or the museum brought up the notion of the invited country for a moment. So Puerto Rico was an invited country, and the show grew to other locations, and then so that was also very interesting, how it began as an annual show for a couple of editions, and then it became a biennial of sorts. But then one thing we discussed was like, I mean, let's make this about 3 years every time, and maybe, you know, we can talk about this too. Maybe there's room for change in every iteration of it, as for the format. The other thing, it was like really a periodization matter, because I think El Museo's, one of the most beautiful things about the mission of El Museo is that it's a museum that doesn't cover only one period, right? So we have a Taino collection, and but by the way, one of the most important things that the museum has done historically was to nourish this relationship with living artists, right? So there were living artists in the very beginning at El Museo's history, as curators, as directors, as, you know, activists, board members, and so on. So I think this is all very interesting, because since the beginning, the museum, even understood as a museum of culture at large and art, visual arts in the center of its mission, has established this very productive, very fecund relationship with living artists. So also one thing that I would discuss is that, I mean, we should go nationwide, we should go triennial and not biennial, so it gives more time for things to mature and for the research to refresh itself, for the format to be reconceived. But also, let's focus on living artists on this show and 21st century. So I think that is a shift in periodization. That doesn't mean there was not Latino art being produced before that. Of course, there was El Museo is like the living proof of that. But we thought that just, go with the chronology or the timeline of the exhibition itself, which is 1999, and focus on art produced on the 21st century by living artists. So this is just a couple of things that I brought into the conversation when we started to shape the exhibition.
Thank you. Thank you all. Rodrigo, one of the things you mentioned was this idea of how the biennial can change, and about biennial fatigue. We have these periodic shows in New York that some focus nationally, some focus mostly regionally or locally. I think this idea of bringing national artists into the exhibition this time is important, because I think it's important to be attentive to the historic East Coast and West Coast movements and those populations, and how in general there's been some interest, especially recently, in looking at those histories as parallel histories, as looking at them together. I'm thinking of the Smithsonian American Art Museum exhibition that Carmen Ramos organized, right? That was a national survey.
Yeah.
And so they're bringing the La Trienal nationally, I think is a good move. And I wondered about your experience in this case, the three of you traveling this time and meeting artists from other places, and how that experience wove itself into the exhibition.
Yeah, I think the Smithsonian show is a great parallel, but they did this from the perspective of building a collection. So they were really building a history, right? So that, I think I didn't see the show, but I've been, this being frankly my bedside table since I started this job, because it's such a beautiful project, and how I'm very interested in the 20th century history of Latinx art or Latino art, and that show is really a wonderful source of inspiration. And I mean, not by coincidence, the first show I proposed to do in the museum is the Taller exhibition that is now up. But in terms of the format, I'll leave, of course, Elia and Susanna elaborate more on the whole East Coast, West Coast, Chicanx, New Yorican convo. But I think one thing that is really interesting to me, and I think to all of us, was to really insist in the format of the survey. Because the survey showed a lot of people think that, for their capacities as curators, or for the institutions they represent, or the institutions they serve for, the survey shows of no use. But I think for here, it's really one of the things we could be doing in 2020 or 2021. So at the end, we broke down the show into 2021, is to create a survey, to really facilitate and enable and create a stage for those visual conversations that we were not seeing happening just from a contemporary today perspective anywhere else. So I think this is really one of the greatest things that the museum could do then. And I mean, we're very excited, of course, that transpires in the conversation to be, producing the show and putting all these artists that they come from very different backgrounds, and they have different media, and they have different life histories, which is fascinating. But to put them in conversation around certain themes and certain common interests, that we found that they could, make up to a conversation together, right? But I think moving forward, this could be anything. This could be maybe not necessarily an exhibition. It could be a series of residences that culminates in an exhibition. It could really, I think this is really important about these projects, is that they have to rethink themselves over time.
I mean, I think these surveys they're still necessary, because there's still too much invisibility. There's not enough attention being given to artists that fall under the Latinx categories. I mean, I think you have seen Latin American artists getting more traction in the United States, but still it kind of lags behind when it comes to Latinx art. And I think that's the important thing. I mean, doing a show on a national level just shows the amount of talent that's out, that's out there. that resonates with current trends and trends that you could see that are going to move beyond just the present, but into the future. And one of the things that I find that it is with this, with what is called Latinx art, is this idea that it sits in these multiple places or positions. It brings the Latinx art with just one artist brings so many layers, because it's not coming from an either or place. It's coming from different positions that individual is now in the, in this country. And I think it's going to resonate. And I think it resonates now more than ever, because we are kind of trying now to fight these binary systems that maintain people at a margin. And I think this is where this show is really, really important for that reason in particular.
And I'd just like to go back to the idea of why national and where we were looking as well. We already mentioned, or Rocío, you mentioned the East Coast, West Coast division that, unfortunately kind of rarely breaks from that. So, we not only wanted to go to the West Coast and to go to places like LA, where of course we found such amazing artists, that it's shocking that, Joey Terrell, who's not an emerging artist, has never shown at El Museo del Barrio. And I should backtrack and just put out there that all of the artists that are part of La Trienal, a really important sort of rule that we created for ourselves is that the artists have never exhibited or had a relationship with El Museo. There's one exception, which I think we'll talk about briefly. But, we wanted to bring in the California artists, the Texas-based artists, the Miami-based artists, but Chicago is also like a big hub for us in the show. But we also wanted to try as much as possible to get to some of the people who are in between and in places that you might not readily think of as having a Latinx art scene or Latinx artists practicing there. So for better or for worse, we were kind of ahead of the Zoom eStudio visit game, because, for the past year, if we couldn't make it, we can't go everywhere, of course, although we would have loved to. We've been Skyping with people and getting to know them through that. So I think, when you go to the list on the website and you get to review some of the names, I hope that you see that we tried to make that attempt to make it as truly national as we could. And I just want to say one other quick little anecdote. We did meet with an artist, an S-Files alumna, whose name we won't mention, although I just gave away that he was a man. But he told us that he used somebody else's address to pretend like he was a New York-based artist to get in the S-Files. And I love that story that, we're breaking away from that, and I think trying to be as expansive as possible. And he also recommended some of the names that you see on the site. So I think that's a beautiful thing that we could, grow out of the beginnings of what S-Files was.
That's beautiful. It's so important, I think, to think about all of the regions as making up this history of American art. I dropped into the chat box a link that is about Midwest Latino art. It's a project that Notre Dame University has been working on for years. And it's great to see how many artists are doing really significant work in the Midwest and who are almost totally overlooked, right, by the East Coast, West Coast binary. And because there's a great question already in the chat from Marcela Guerrero that is a question we were already going to address. So yeah. Okay, I'm going to skip to that. She asks, how did the title Estamos Bien, i.e. Bad Bunny song, come about? And how does the title shape the thesis of the Trienal?
Who wants to take it away?
Rodrigo, you take it away.
Yeah, it's very interesting, this thing, because I'll be completely honest with the genealogy of the title. So among the artists, Susanna mentioned Chicago as an important hub of the exhibition. And as a matter of fact, we didn't start the research there, but this was probably the trip we took where we did the first trip we took where we did a lot of studio visits in one day, right? And I remember that I had been gone already because I had to come back to New York. And then Susanna went the next day to see Candida Alvarez. And then when we reconvened a couple of days later in the museum, she says, oh, we went to Candida, it was fantastic. And then, of course, we started to do more research around Candida, and we realized that she was such an important figure in the history of El Museo because she has exhibited here as a very important female artist in the New York arts movement, but still very young. In the 70s, then she moved to New York and to Chicago, and she became like a very important artist there, an educator, and with like very beautiful, beautiful work, working with abstraction. And then she had a show, and there was like this large-scale piece in the show that was called Estoy Bien. And that title stick with us for a bit, right? So, and we debated, I mean, should we use it as the title of the show? We want to really honor Candida as the only exception to the rule we created, that we were not showing non-artists who have exhibited at our museum before. So, and people say, oh, but this is not, you know, this is not really working. I say, well, what if we go for the plural? Estamos bien. Yes. And then Elia one day say, yes, that works. And so I say, yes. Susanna was inclined to estoy bien. I say, yes, that works. And then we say, estamos bien. And then we started to talk with people in the institution. And then we were like back and forth. And then Rosemary sent us the Bad Bunny song, right? So, and that was like a revelation. Our colleague Rosemary Cortez from Communicate. And that was a beautiful revelation because I mean, it's fantastic, and I'll let Elia and Susanna elaborate more on that genealogy, but how, you know, the title of Candida's painting was referring to the post Hurricane Maria, the aftermath of the hurricane, but there was something that is really talks a lot about the days we're living in. Right? And I think this show is a true expression of, I mean, it's gonna be, of the research, at least it is already, of like this whole pre-COVID, post-COVID situation, pre-digital, peak, post-digital, that thing will become a blur in a second. We won't remember this before and after. But this show was really caught in the middle, right? And this is really about not only the situation with the natural disasters, but with global warming, with the emergence of like totalitarian regimes in Brazil and the United States around the same time. So people, they learn to say estamos bien for everything. So that's, we really took this on a sarcastic note as the title, but I'll leave it to you to elaborate more.
Well, that was kind of the whole point of the Bad Bunny song too, which we were illuminated afterwards, after Rosemary put it in put it in our lap. You know, it was kind of like a homage to this victim of Hurricane Maria. I remember he got on Jimmy Fallon and talked about how the US, or Donald Trump specifically, was in denial. So it really kind of, as Rodrigo said, it was just like, wow, this is exactly kind of like what we're thinking about, but we're good, you know, we're fine, you know, so.
And I mean, we've talked about it in terms of, you know, resilience, but I also see it really as like a term of provocation, or like almost get out of our way. Estamos bien.
Yeah.
So I also think of it as that. I think it holds all of these different meanings in one. And we did also talk about, we had selected this title earlier this year, but pre-pandemic. And I remember in the beginning of the pandemic, we started revisiting the title, and we started thinking, can we use this title? But as things have gone on, you know, I think following George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, so many, you know, we started holding on to it even more. Like, yes, Estamos Bien is the title. It has to be the title. So I think we're all really excited by it. And now it's like funny all the time. So.
It all speaks of like a state of willing to be more visible and resilience and, you know, moving to the next stage. But just anecdotally, when we were working on the graphic identity, which by the way, we also unveiled today, created by Elaine Ramos, beautiful design and concept. She called me up one day and said, "Estamos bien, are you sure?" Cool parts or anything like that. So this is, I mean, this expresses a little bit this sarcastic standpoint that the title also conveys.
I love that. I mean, when I heard it, for me, it was immediately about resilience also, because I told the group last week that I immediately associated it with the plight of the Chilean miners who were stuck in the mine. And one of the first thing they wrote is, "Estamos bien, los 33 en la mina," you know, saying that they were surviving even in the abyss. Lots of love in the chat for Candida and also for the title. Just let's take a brief respite, really briefly, because we know we don't really want to belabor this point, but because we've already used the term Latinx, I'll just mention that I get an article every week in my inbox about how much people either embrace or reject the term Latinx. So maybe we just want to talk briefly about that.
Well, you want to go, Susanna?
No, you go, Elia.
Okay. Well, the first thing I think is people think it's an identity and it's a flattening. And I always talk about it as a space. It's just kind of a point. It's like a destination to think about all these different identities, or how these identities intersect, how they're different. Because there's so many. And I think what we're trying to do is not head into all these like separate factions, but think of a way that we come together. And so, you know, the destination is Latinx. I mean, that's kind of how I kind of always see it. But you know, people think it's like, oh, forget that you're Puerto Rican, or forget that you're Dominican or Argentinian or whatever. No, you're Latinx. And I don't think that's what the term means. It's just a way to kind of, how do these people resonate in a space?
And I think we really tried to, or a goal of this show is to really use that concept of Latinx to really push at a very intersectional identity, which, you know, we wanted to incorporate a wide variety of generations, countries of origin, races, your sexual orientation, and really promote, you know, really push the boundaries of Latinx. Of course, you know, we invited artists that I think also may not traditionally be considered Latinx, let's say. So you'll see there's artists from with backgrounds from the Anglophone Caribbean, from the Francophone Caribbean, and we very much wanted to open the space. Of course, if anybody didn't want to be included in that category, which we sometimes thought we might encounter, and we never did. And on the contrary, we had artists tell us, you know, I'm always put in the category of Indigenous, or I'm always put in the category of African diaspora or Black, and I'm also Puerto Rican, or I'm also Chicano. So many artists were actually really thrilled to be included in it, which, you know, we weren't always expecting how we would be received, but we're really happy that so many people of such diverse backgrounds, you know, are going to be part of the show.
Yeah, I mean, just to add a little bit to that, first of all, I want to give like a big nod to Susanna and Elia, because they taught me so much about this during this process, and I've been learning so much. So I mean, really thank you for the partnership and for, you know, all illuminating conversations we've been having. But I think this is such a taboo, no? I mean, it's an enormous taboo. People think they can say someone is indigenous because the word indigenous is a colonial construct. And then Latinx becomes an issue because of the mention to Latin in the root of the word, referring to you know, Romanic or whatever European culture, classic European culture and Latin language. So I think we wanted to, as of course Susanna mentioned before, we wanted to go beyond that parameter of the Spanish-speaking language as a common thread, because I think that was of no use to us, frankly, right? So I mean, next thing you know, you're putting like a Spanish artist in the show just because they speak Spanish. That's not what this was about, you know? So I think it really talks about an experience. We're not talking about Latin American people, like a cultural experience. We're not talking about Latin American artists who were based in the US for a while, or, you know, this is not what this show is about. So I think that is a diasporic dimension to be claimed as one of the possible threads one can encounter, but that's not monodimensional either, right? So, and I'm really confident that this is not like a rigid contour. It's not an outline. So this is Latinx and we put everyone inside. No, maybe that's a scene. You know, maybe this is a scene. Maybe we're talking about, because there's so much commonality in the works, and it really talks about being brown in America, and in several cases being Black in America, and being considered both things. So I think it really goes beyond a rigid contour or an outline or container. I think that's the word that we're trying, or the notion of the term that we're trying to avoid. And I think the X is something that also brings like a position against the binary or the heteronormativity, right? So that's how the term came about. And I think we would like to encompass and to use it for the sake of this show, to also provoke the discussion, but not to define anyone's identity.
Yeah, I think we all agree that self-definition is the most important thing. Also, I just always remind people that it's great to include people who don't identify by a particular gender. And further, it's a feminist response to the patriarchy of the Spanish language, which I feel like as a non-native speaker, I can say, because it's something that, you know, it has always bothered me about the Spanish language. So Latinx is a really great, I think, intervention into that. And because it was already brought up, I think we should discuss the inclusion of the broadening of the Caribbean to include non-Spanish speaking Caribbean artists in the exhibition. In the 2013 version of the Biennial, we included, I think, 4 Filipinx artists. Prior to that, in the 2011 version, Jason Keeling was in our show, also English-speaking Caribbean descent. So maybe you want to talk about that broadening.
I mean, for me, part of that also has to do with El Museo's institutional history. I think the Caribbean crossroads of the world, that was extremely foundational to me as I was still a graduate student, and that was really emphasizing all of the Caribbean, Hispanophone, Francophone, Anglophone, but also even looking to the South American coast. And so I always, when I have thought of El Museo, it's an interesting contradiction, because when I talk to people, I think that people often want to create boundaries when they hear what our mission is, but I really like to take a more expansive approach. And through all of our work at El Museo and looking at the institutional history, that's actually been baked into it from the beginning. So that was always part of our research when we were going out to talk to artists. It seemed like we couldn't not include some of these artists. And as you said, Rocío, you know, the Caribbean has always been a part of the S-Files, or has previously been a part of the S-Files.
Well, people from the Caribbean, even, you know, outside the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, also deal with being multiple, you know, because of the history of slavery, because of the other people that were on the island and how that mix came to be. Some are more predominantly African, but that multiplicity is kind of inherent in the Caribbean. And when I say Caribbean, I just don't refer to the islands, I refer to the basin. So it touches like Venezuela, Colombia, I think even parts of Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. It all is part of the basin. So it's all this kind of multiplicity that exists within all these identities. I mean, I remember once being in, this is an interesting fact, I was in, I think in a Latinx forum, it was a private thing, and one artist from the Dominican Republic didn't want to really identify with people from South America and felt more akin to all the people in the Caribbean because of that multiplicity that exists. And so we have a way, we identify that way. So for me, it made sense to include, and it doesn't have to be a Caribbean person. I just feel like the Caribbean, it's like very, it's there, you know? But I mean, it does, like I said, it doesn't have to be a Caribbean person, but it does, there, you know, you do find people that feel that they reside in like different worlds, and you do find it not just in the Caribbean, but throughout the United States. And I feel indigenous people here feel the same. That's why Post-Commodity was, yes, we want to do this. We want to be part of it. And we were very excited when they said yes.
I think people would be interested to hear about two different aspects of the process. The first is that I think it was really crucial that you all organized think tanks as part of developing the exhibition. There was, I think, a collaborative spirit among the people in the field that you invited to come and learn from, which I love. And for people to learn from each other, even in those think tanks. You also mentioned that there were artists who recommended names of peers. As I've said, I always feel like an artist's word or recommendation is golden, as well as local experts in the cities that you visited. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about the think tanks.
Yes, this was part of the process of basically starting the conversation, right? How does one start a conversation? And there were a couple of things that we wanted to create. One was that we wanted to have more like insight. I think Elia, of course, is like a very important link because she was an S-File artist. But also she was doing a lot of work with the Supper Club, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Elia, because that was for sure very inspirational for us as the creation of those conversational spaces. So we wanted to, first of all, I think, especially for me, it was really important to hear more on the perspective of artists who have shown at El Museo before. So I mean, sadly omit some names because I don't have the list in front of me, but I remember Miguel Luciano, Nicolás Domingues Teves, Elia, Rachel Mosman,
Adriana Zavala.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the
artists. Oh, as far as artists, yes.
David Antonio Cruz.
David Antonio Cruz.
Exactly. Juan Sanchez, who I'm not sure if it's an S5 artist, but yeah. But I mean, those voices were really important to be heard. We didn't ask them so much, I have to be fair, for like recommendations on the spot or anything. But I wanted to hear, we all did, on the perspective of what were those shows about, what those shows enable them to do or serve them as a platform. That's one thing, but also we wanted to engage with other people like Marcela Guerrero from the Whitney, Carmen Ermo from the Brooklyn Museum, scholars and writers such as Ed Morales, Adriana Zavala, and as I say, I'm so sorry if I'm omitting anyone, but all voices were very important to be heard and to really create those conversations. So we held two sessions here, at El Museo, like closed door sessions, really to you know, to discuss our ideas. I remember Adriana and Ed, they were both fantastic on their experience writing about Latinx and researching and creating, in case of Adriana, space in the academia. And I think the contrasting with the whole Latin American thing, and I saw that Arlene is in the, she said something in the chat box. It's a very interesting thinking material too, I think, very. Because there was, of course, the idea of the S-Files always having Latin American artists who are based in New York, or for some moment having them. And also, I mean, how did, there was like a much more formed body of exhibition history in the US, or, you know, academic scholarly studies in the US around Latin American art, and not so much on Latinx art. So all that, I think it really helped to shape this decision also to really focus on Latinx, I would say. I think that's really important to say right now. That was really the result of, I mean, our internal conversations as curators and in the institution as a whole with Patrick and other leadership in the museum. But also those think tanks, they were really like setting the direction for us, so to speak.
I want to pick up on something you just mentioned, Rodrigo, and sort of make a little bit of a tangent, just to say that also when we're thinking about Latinx artists, we are interested in artists who have a relationship with the United States. So who developed here, who lived here as children, maybe not, but certainly who had a career here, you know, that there has to be a concerted relationship. So we didn't look at artists who are recent arrivals to the United States, for example. And I want to bring that up because I do see that there's a question in the chat about if there's an interest or conversation to make the show travel, quote, back to Latin America. I mean, the show is not traveling just because of the nature of it being a triennial. I definitely want to say that I think all of these artists merit recognition globally, but that it wouldn't be a return back to Latin America. I mean, some of the artists in the show are indigenous and their roots are here in the United States. A number of artists have been in the United States for multiple generations. So again, I think all of these artists would probably welcome having exhibits elsewhere, and we certainly believe that they deserve all of that attention, but I'd like to think a little bit differently about how we would maybe.
I'm all with you on that one, Susan. I think it's the only point of return would be pre-1492. And that's, I mean, it's really, I think it's really a mistake to think in terms of going back to Latin America, because I mean, there's multiple routes, and I mean, it's really about the experience of it's, I think the context is really about the US, and I think the way we want to take this is that the museum does this show and does the shows and serves as a platform and a vitrine for this production to be seen and to be researched globally, right? So I think that's the idea more.
That's excellent. Okay, I think this might be our last question that sort of we had prepared, and then I'll encourage people again to drop questions into the Q&A. Because of the pandemic and the reality that we're living now, it was really important to create the digital projects as a kind of preview exhibition for the exhibition. I wonder if you could all talk about how these were organized and how they might influence the future of the Museo's work going forward. And I know, of course, because of the pandemic, the exhibition's dates had to be moved, but really not as much as other institutions have been shifting dates. So it's kind of timely that it's happening. I think a lot of people feel that. So just a little about that, the digital previews and how that's crucial to the work moving forward.
I mean, we were actually scheduled to open the exhibition, I believe, last week. So when, March hit, we were, we were really moving forward. And so, partially moving online was not to, one, lose that momentum, but to really think about how so much of the artwork that we had been looking at and how the artist practices, they were foreseeing this moment in many ways. The artist selection list has really been in formation since the beginning of this year. Most of the artworks that we're showing haven't changed, and rather they're pointing to a lot of thematics that have only been exacerbated and brought to light. So we wanted to look at the online space, very much thinking about online space as an actual space. So we didn't want to simply translate a project onto the, the digital world. So we approached the artists Lisania Cruz, Michael Menchaca, Jime Izquierdo Ugas, Collective Magpie, and Poncili Creacion to really create projects specific to this particular moment. I wanna turn it to one of my other curators to expand on this, to talk about some of the projects.
Yes, I think when we were talking about the think tank, it's interesting because I see this as, the lead up, the preparation, but also, there's a continuum, you just like several stages. One thing we would have wanted to do that we were actually scheduled to do was a seminar in the museum back in the springtime. And that obviously we had to postpone. Now we're like thinking, what should we do in terms of like a public program platform? And we decided to go for a program after the show is open, which I think we really want to now, moving forward, to really focus on the exhibition. But those 5 projects by the artists that Susanna mentioned, they were really important for the engagement with the artist, the engagement with the audience, right? So I really consider them, and I think we all do, as part of the exhibition.
Yes.
Also part of this is something that I said before, this pre and post not being so important so much or anymore. But RIPS, certainly the idea of internet as public space was so important. And I remember we having this conversation with Lisania in the beginning, and she asked, we're thinking maybe do something in the street or something. And then we say, well, let's do it in the internet, because we have to understand internet as public space. And her project is it's so beautiful, and it has this component of participation, which I think is fantastic. And so is, in terms of participation, Collective Magpies, the race survey, .com, which is also a project to discussing race and engaging people's participation through a digital platform. So I think they really help us. In other words, they really help us to raise not only momentum, but to raise content and to raise conversations around the show between artists, the curators in the institution, and the audience. So every time we started a new project, we held a public program online to talk about those projects.
And I really feel like these projects simply, they couldn't wait. And, they couldn't wait until March. Lisania is really an examination, I think, of this particular moment and how we're gonna not only mourn what the American dream was, but think about the future. Same for Collective Magpie, which, originally we were thinking about it because it was the census. And of course, not only was it the census, but it's an exploration of race, which there's nothing, I don't think, more timely than that. Same for Michael Menchaca, whose work really addresses the wall. And, we were supposed to launch last week, right before the election. So we still wanted to hold on to some of that timeline. And I just want to encourage everyone, all of those are available on El Museo's website, and Lisania's and Collective Magpies are both participatory, and they will help create. All of the works will be shown in the exhibition in person themselves, but those two works especially, we would love to ask for you to participate, to fill out the race survey, because it's going to shape the piece that will go in the gallery in the future. So please check out those projects if you haven't already.
Yeah, I mean, I think the online projects too address some of the themes that we're dealing with in the live exhibition that's going to be happening in March, such as the ideas of family, race is being addressed, and family is interesting because we have Hime's work, which deals with her transgendered and queer family, and it has voices and stories, which I encourage all of you to get online and listen to them, because they're narratives of encouragement, of sadness, and but they're good. Están bien. It's like, I think that's what was so powerful for me about that work.
Yeah, just in terms of like sneak peek into the show, right? I mean, I feel like going there a little bit. I think this is a conversation that I think it's also interesting, just to provoke, and if anyone, Rocío, wants to jump in, or the audience, I think there's also a big this idea of cultural projection, right? I mean, that people project themselves into a cultural label and they expect something. And I think this show is really about the individual contribution of these artists, and they really navigate very diverse and different idioms when it comes to the way they express themselves as artists, right? So I think this is, I mean, I can't help mentioning a couple of things that are really interesting, but I think there's like this intersection between arts and crafts. That's something that's very interesting right now, I think, in some of contemporary production. But I think we're also taking this to a different level, which is the intersection of art and labor, right? That's also very interesting, because when I think of the work of like Dionys Ortiz from New York, and how he's creating this beautiful architectural sculptures that took very abstract work, by the way, that talk about a history of US art in terms of minimalism and hard edge abstraction, but really talks about his background being trained as a construction worker by his father to create floor works, right? So I think that's extremely interesting, to really claim a very beautiful, like a very important position for those experiences into the art realm. Or Janira Collado from Miami, who mentioned to us, who grew up seeing construction work as part of her, the skills of her family, and how that reflects on her work, right? That's one aspect. And I mean, just to sneak peek a little bit more, I think of like Vince Valdez, who's considered like a hyper-realist or like hyper-figurative painter, coming from like a beautiful lineage of Chicanx representational work. But I think he's taking this to a different place. I think really the narrative is there, but I think what he's doing with his just this idiom of like painting, I mean, following the lead of several other painters is really fascinating. So, I mean, just to mention a few examples. I don't know if you want to mention more, maybe you want, because you brought up.
No, that's yeah.
Brought up family, and it's true that family is it's
key. Yeah, it's in there.
It's in there. It's in different works in the show.
I just wanted to point out there's a couple of really interesting questions in the Q&A. do you, from Jeanette Marguerite Bolden, she asks, do you see a common trend that is appearing among the artists that you've interacted with? Also, what is your opinion on how curators are displaying Latinx art in today's galleries?
I don't see a lot of display in galleries. That's the answer to that question.
It's not yet.
Not yet. I mean, I think people are, I think there is people, I think galleries are still trying to understand, you know, trying to see if it has value, you know, is it going to make, you know, I mean, because that's a reality of the gallery. But I mean, the common thread that I saw a lot, and we just talked about it, was this idea of family and how, whether it be not necessarily your biological family, but your family and how that influences your art production. And we see it, like Rodrigo mentioned, Yanira and Dionys, with both their families working in construction or building, and how that's influenced their work. I don't know if you guys want to bring up any other influences or trends you see within the family, within the artist.
I mean, I agree that I don't think that we're seeing that much Latinx art in the galleries. I do think what we're seeing is the word Latinx art being used without really tying it to anything. You know, I think it is in danger of becoming trendy without holding on what I think it was intended to be, which is something that I think we're arguing against in the show. You know, there is a reason to use that term. Again, we're thinking about artists with really diasporic backgrounds working in the United States. But in terms of trends, I mean, the show does not, you could pull some themes out of it, like family, climate change or approach to the land. There's also an interest in commodification, gentrification, but this is not across all 43 artists. You know, I don't think that there's anything linking all 43 artists. We have artists who are working in painting, ceramics, photography, sculpture, video, and it's extremely diverse.
And also there's works that really address very pressing matters that concern the Latinx population in the US, such as the border crisis. Right? I can't help thinking of the work of Michael Menchaca, for instance, which we premiered as its newly conceived website, The Wall, right? That really talks about that, or Sandy Rodriguez's beautiful paintings, also addressing that directly.
Torn apart,
separados, right, with the whole ICE connections and in the politics. So so there's different things. So it's in this way, it's a very sort of survey like show that we really want to, you know, not think of the show as a theme show by no means, but to really think of the show as a conference, right? As where the artist brings their individual contributions, but we as curators, we help to, you know, create some, you know, clustered conversations through the show.
and these underlying themes of immigration, family, they are kind of interconnected in a way. If you really think about it, it's not like direct, but it is. There is you can say that they're kind of threaded together. It's like concerns of people in the diaspora. It's kind of manifesting with the artist in different ways.
Thank you all for all of that. That was just an amazing discussion. There's no more questions directly in the Q&A, so I think we can wrap up. And I wonder if you all want to say some parting thoughts.
Maybe before parting thoughts, I would like to maybe ask a question for Elia that we talked about earlier, which is Elia as as an artist, as an S-File alum or family member, you know, we're really curious your experience on the other side as a curator.
On the other side. Um, I mean, after, you know, I did this project called the Supper Club, and many times people were telling me I was curating these dinners that I was doing. So I feel like to some degree this was a kind of an extension of that, but dealing specifically with the Latinx community. Uh, I mean, it was great. It was just like exciting to visit all these artists. I mean, you kind of always know that there's artists on the West Coast and in the Midwest and down South, but to actually like experience this and experience other artists like that. I mean, I think that's the strength of this exhibition, because I think others, even though they're not don't have time to go out to the Midwest or Las Vegas or wherever, kind of feel that sense of wanting to connect. So for me, it felt really great to be part of that and to facilitate that, and hopefully be the first of many artists that you will continue to bring on. Because I do think having an artist, I don't know, that's maybe because I'm one, is better.
I fully agree. I fully agree. Actually, we do have another question from an artist. I'd like to ask this question. I think it's interesting. Lina Huerta, a former S-Files artist, asks, did you experience seeing and understanding Latinx work all around the country, that it brought new perspectives regarding Latinx art here at home in New York City? In other words, new perspectives as curators, that you were seeing this work all around other parts of the country, and did it influence what you were seeing here, or have a conversation with what you were seeing here in some way?
I think for me, you know, here, East Coast, the focus, I think the focus is on, I mean, for me, because it's a lot of Puerto Ricans and Dominicans and people from the Caribbean, the focus is more on your Black identity and these kinds of conversations. You start going out West and it's more about your Indigenous identity and how that plays into your work. And then we found, and I think we found some people, they're not in the show, but nonetheless, I think influential people that have both an Indigenous and Black identities simultaneously. And so I think for me, that was really important to talk about that and to think about that within the context of even my own practice and how my practice fits into this bigger conversation.
I totally agree, Elia, and I think this is so important in the context of El Museo, right? Because this idea of a museum that talks about this multiracial experience, it's really where this museum comes from, right? So I think this is obviously the African diaspora and the experience of the African diaspora in the Americas, but also the indigeneity and the indigenous heritage. That's really what, and European heritage, by the way, that's really what brings, you know, what makes El Museo's mission so important. But I think, I mean, going back to her question, I think there's a conversation of Latinx, and that is really, it's really important to be more, it's really important to be more present in the conversation of US art, not only in terms of like one regional bias versus the other, but really like the big contribution of what can be called Latinx art or Latino art to the US art history. I think this is extremely important, and this is where we want to also have a contribution with this exhibition.
I just want to echo that. I think this work is crucial to creating a more inclusive and complete history of American art. That's what we're talking about. This is American art, right? And so to have that history, to embrace it broadly, I think I'm just gonna gush for a minute, but the Biennial exhibitions are crucial because they are like an inventory of American artists, Latinx artists who have been working for decades, right? Doing their work. And, you know, I think it's a crucial part of that history of very local, right? Looking at New York City principally, but a crucial part of that history. And I just want to say how grateful I am to El Museo and to all of you for the work that you're doing. It's really beautiful. Oh, and I did have one idea. I don't know, maybe artists want to weigh in on this, but you remember when I think it was Crystal Bridges when they did that giant survey of American art and they got in a car and drove everywhere. It was crazy. But one of the things that I do believe they did is even artists who are not ended up being included in the exhibition, there was a way you could trace who they had visited. And not, I'm sure you have other work to do, but like you might want to make that information public also, because you've done so much research already. Even artists who weren't included in the exhibition, it would be good for them, for people to know that they merited a visit, and it's because of logistics or space or whatever, not because the work is not good, that they're not included. They're part of that art history also.
The Excel is there. This I promise.
Exactly.
The Excel exists. You know, you have access to it. So maybe
Giant Google sheet that you'll share with the entire world in the spirit of sharing and equity.
Thank you for the suggestion. That's beautiful. Yeah, we discussed it actually, right?
And just in the spirit of sharing, I think thank you so much to all of the artists that we visited. You know, like you said, Rocio, and we were talking earlier, there's only so much space in the galleries, but there are so many exciting, amazing Latinx artists out there that it's been just like so amazing working on this show. We have so many shows to create out of it, so many future triennales, and we thank all the artists for opening their doors to us and for sharing the names of their friends and collaborators. It's been an amazing experience.
Yeah, there was a lot of generosity I found with that, with artists sharing other artists. It's not always people do that. So to see people saying, well, if you're doing this, look at this, you know, sending us lists, emailing us names. So yes, I'm chiming in with Susanna. Thank you to all the artists for doing that and for being part of the show. And know that those that weren't selected, we love you too.
So important. Gracias todos. Thank you all. Everyone, make sure you visit the Museo website to see the complete list of artists and get excited about the opening next March. Do we want to say a date? March
13th.
13th.
A year from the closure for the pandemic.
Oh, wow. Celebrating a year. Excellent.